$6, Denise said, sliding the paper across Robert Peterson's kitchen table. That's what you wanted, Dustin. Now it's yours. Dustin looked at the bill of sale, but didn't touch it. The county notice lay beside it, bright orange and folded through the middle. Condemned was printed across the top in black letters. His aunt had already signed her name. Denise Peterson Valdez sat in Robert's usual chair, the one at the head of the table. She had worn black to the funeral that morning. Now her jacket hung over the back of another chair, and she'd rolled up her sleeves like there was work to finish. Her husband, Gregory, stood at the counter drinking Robert's coffee. He had found the unopened package in the pantry and made a fresh pot without asking. The booth has to be moved in 10 days, Denise continued. After that, the county can demolish it with everything else. Dustin glanced at the 6 $1 bills near his hand. They were all he had taken from his wallet. Gregory gave a tired laugh. One last bad investment at the Starlight. Nobody else laughed. Dustin was 19. He had lived in that house with his grandfather for 7 years, but the room still felt arranged around the 2 adults who had come to claim it. Denise had a folder from the bank. Gregory had the spare keys to Robert's truck. Their grown son, Brian, leaned against the doorway with both hands in his coat pockets, looking anywhere except at Dustin. Angel Riley, the estate attorney, sat at the far end of the table. She had spent the last 40 minutes explaining what Robert's will said and what it didn't say. The house passed to Denise under a beneficiary deed Robert had signed years earlier. The accounts named her as payable on death beneficiary. The Starlight Drive-In property, all 50 acres outside town, went to her through the will. Denise was also executor. A development company called Heartland Crossroads had already made an offer on the land, and she intended to accept it. Dustin received Robert's clothing, personal papers, hand tools, and any personal property Denise didn't want. The old ticket booth had not appeared on anybody's list. It was a narrow wooden structure sitting near the entrance lane of the Starlight, its windows boarded in one lower corner softened by years of rain. Robert had rebuilt it in 2016 after the original booth finally gave way. Dustin remembered carrying him screws and holding boards while Robert measured. He also remembered Robert refusing to call it a shed, even after the drive-in stopped showing regular movies. A ticket booth sells tickets, Robert would say. A shed holds rakes. The county inspector called it unsafe debris. Denise called it a removal expense. Dustin had asked for it before he understood how little else was coming to him. Angel touched the bill of sale with one finger. You don't have to do this today. Yes, he does, Denise said. The property contract has deadlines. The sale hasn't closed. It will. Angel looked at Dustin. If you buy the booth, the demolition order becomes your problem. Moving it may cost more than it's worth. I know. He didn't know. He had $43 in his checking account and less than half a tank of gas. He knew only that Gregory had suggested knocking the booth flat with a tractor, and something in Dustin had refused before the sensible part of him could speak. Denise pushed a pen toward him. Your grandfather charged $6 for an adult ticket in 1987, she said. You were always talking about how much the old place meant. There, a little family history. Dustin looked at her. You knew I lived here. Her fingers stopped on the folder. This isn't about that. Where am I supposed to go? Brian shifted in the doorway. Gregory put down his coffee. Denise drew a slow breath, as if Dustin had asked a question she'd hoped manners would prevent. You're an adult, she said. You knew Grandpa wasn't going to live forever. Dustin's face warmed. He hated that Brian was there to hear it. He hated that Angel was there, though she was the only person at the table who looked troubled. Most of all, he hated that Denise had called Robert Grandpa. Robert had been her father. The softer word made the sentence sound kinder than it was. I thought there might be time, Dustin said. There is time. Gregory and I aren't throwing you onto the sidewalk this minute. Gregory folded his arms. We need the house cleared before the appraiser comes Thursday. It was Monday afternoon. Denise shot him a look. He can stay tonight. One night, Gregory said. Brian finally spoke. He could maybe stay with us. His father turned. Where? I don't know. The office. The office is full. Dustin knew the room wasn't full. It held a desk, an exercise bike, and 3 boxes Gregory had never unpacked after their last move. Brian knew it too. His offer still landed weakly because he hadn't made it to Dustin. He had made it toward the floor. Denise softened her voice. There are motels. With $43? Angel closed her legal pad. Dustin, I can give you information for emergency housing. Gregory muttered, he has a job. I had a job, Dustin said. He'd worked evenings at the Starlight. During the last summer, Robert opened the snack bar for weekend events. After that, he helped his grandfather with repairs and picked up short jobs around town. Robert covered the house, groceries, and the old truck's insurance. Dustin had been looking for steady work, but looking felt different when there was still food in the refrigerator. Now the refrigerator belonged to Denise. She tapped the bill of sale. Do you want the booth or not? Dustin signed. Denise counted the money twice, folded it, and placed it in the estate envelope. Then she signed the county transfer form beneath the bill of sale. Gregory shook his head. $6 for condemned lumber. Dustin pulled the papers toward him. It isn't lumber yet. 5 days earlier, Robert had been alive at the same kitchen table, peeling the label from a bottle of root beer with his thumbnail. Nothing about that Thursday morning had seemed important enough to remember. That was the part Dustin kept returning to. The toast had burned on one side. The radio lost its signal during the weather report. Robert complained that the kitchen clock was 3 minutes fast, then refused to fix it because he liked knowing he had 3 extra minutes. At 78, Robert moved carefully, but disliked being helped. He had thick white hair that never stayed combed and hands marked by old cuts. That morning, he wore his brown work shirt with a missing button at one cuff. Dustin stood at the sink rinsing a plate. You heading to Main Street? He asked, after lunch. What's on Main Street? Work. That answers nothing. It answers enough. Robert smiled into his root beer. He went downtown several times a week. Sometimes he said he was checking on a friend. Sometimes he came back with sawdust on his boots. Dustin assumed he did odd work for store owners or visited Holly Chandler at her mercantile. Robert had known half of Council Grove long enough to enter through their back doors. Dustin dried the plate and opened the refrigerator. We're out of eggs. We have one. That's out of eggs for 2 people. You can have it. I had toast. Then we're rich in eggs. Dustin smiled despite himself. I'm going to Emporia tomorrow. The building supply place is taking applications. You tell them you can read a tape measure? I put it on the application. Tell them twice. Robert stood and carried his bottle to the recycling bin. Halfway across the kitchen, he stopped with one hand on the counter. Dustin turned. You all right? Robert waited a moment before answering. Just stood too fast. You were already standing. I stood too fast 5 minutes ago. It caught up with me. Dustin stepped closer, but Robert lifted a hand. I'm fine. That sentence had ruled the house for years. Robert used it for sore knees, overdue bills, bad weather, and the long, quiet evenings when Kristen's name came up. Dustin's mother had died in 2019. After the funeral, Robert cleared out the room where he stored old drive-in posters and put a bed there. He never called it Dustin's room until Dustin did. Joshua, Dustin's father, had died in a highway accident in 2010. Dustin knew him mostly from photographs and other people's careful stories. Kristen had done her best alone after that. When she died, Robert was the person who came for him. Denise attended the funeral, brought a casserole, and told Robert to call if he needed anything. She lived close enough to visit. Most months, she didn't. Robert had never said much against her. Even when Gregory made jokes about the empty drive-in, Robert only changed the subject. That Thursday, Dustin watched his grandfather walk from the kitchen to his bedroom. You should see a doctor? I saw one. When? Recently. What did he say? That I'm old. That isn't a diagnosis. At my age, it covers plenty. He came back wearing his outdoor coat. He had a small ring of keys in one hand and a folded piece of paper in the other. Change of plan, Robert said. I'm going to lie down. Dustin took the keys because Robert held them out. You want me to call somebody? No. Denise? Robert's answer came too quickly. No. Then he seemed to reconsider. Not yet, he said. Dustin helped him to bed. Robert objected twice and then stopped objecting. His breathing was shallow. Dustin called the clinic anyway. By the time the ambulance arrived, Robert wasn't answering questions. He died at the hospital that evening. Denise reached the emergency room before the doctor came back. Gregory arrived 10 minutes later with a legal envelope tucked under his arm. Dustin noticed it because it seemed strange to carry paperwork into a room where someone had just died. Denise hugged Dustin briefly. Did he say anything? She asked. Dustin thought she meant before he died. He said he was tired. Anything about the house? Or the drive-in? Dustin pulled away enough to see her face. No. Denise nodded. All right. She sat beside Gregory and began making calls. By Friday morning, she had Robert's spare house key. By Friday afternoon, Gregory had photographed every room and placed small adhesive labels on anything he thought should be appraised. On Saturday, Denise met a representative from Heartland Crossroads at the Starlight property. Dustin learned about that meeting when he drove out there and found them beside the locked concession building. The Starlight sat along Route 57, outside Council Grove, where the town gave way to open ground and long grass. The screen tower still rose at the far end of the lot. Its white face had gone gray, streaked by rain and nesting birds. Rows of rusted speaker posts marked the viewing lanes. Robert had removed the old speakers years ago because people kept stealing them. The red Heartland Crossroads pickup looked too polished for the place. A man in a blue shirt stood with Denise and Gregory near the entrance. He held rolled plans beneath one arm. Denise walked toward Dustin before he reached them. "What are you doing here?" "I came for Grandpa's socket set. You can't just remove things. They're his tools. They're estate property." Dustin looked past her. "Who's that?" "A developer. He's been dead one day." Her mouth tightened. The offer existed before he died. Did he accept it? He was considering it. Gregory joined them. "We don't need a scene out here." Dustin hadn't raised his voice. The developer unrolled his plans across the hood of his truck. Colored lines divided the drive-in into roads, parking areas, and building pads. The old screen wasn't on the drawing, neither was the concession stand. Near the entrance, where Robert's ticket booth still leaned beneath its faded red roof, there was only an access road. Dustin stared at the clean blank space. What happens to everything? Gregory followed his eyes. Demolition. All of it? That's usually how construction works. The county notice was already stapled to the ticket booth. 10 days to remove or demolish the structure because of rot, a weakened floor, and an unstable roofline. Dustin went closer. The booth's plywood siding had curled at the bottom. One window was boarded from inside. The small hinge door sagged enough to scrape the threshold. Through a gap in the boards, he could see the narrow counter where Robert once kept a metal cash box and rolls of orange tickets. "Grandpa built that," he said. Gregory shrugged. "Grandpa built plenty of things." Denise stepped beside Dustin. "If you want something for sentimental reasons, take one of the signs. The booth would cost us money to haul away. Then give it to me." Gregory looked at him as if he had misheard. Denise said, "You don't own land to put it on. I'll find somewhere. You don't have money to move it, then it shouldn't matter to you." The developer glanced up from his plans. He was trying not to listen, which made it clear he heard everything. Gregory rubbed a hand across his jaw. "Fine. $6. Dustin looked at him. "What?" $6, Gregory repeated. "That's what Robert used to charge for one ticket. You want the booth? Buy it. Then nobody can say Denise gave estate property away." Denise didn't agree that day. She said they would discuss it after the funeral. By Monday, she had decided the $6 would save her the removal charge. Now, with the bill of sale folded in his coat pocket, Dustin stood in Robert's bedroom while Denise waited in the hallway. He packed 2 changes of clothes, work boots, a phone charger, and the framed photograph from Robert's dresser. In the photograph, Robert stood in front of the Starlight screen, with Joshua on one side and Denise on the other. They were grown, but young enough that Robert's hair was still dark. Denise watched him place it in his duffel. "That belongs with the family pictures. It's a picture of my father. It's a picture of all of us. You can have it copied." She almost argued. Then she looked toward the open closet. "Take Grandpa's brown coat, too. It won't fit Gregory." That was as close as she came to kindness. Dustin carried his bag to the truck Robert had let him use. The truck wasn't part of his inheritance. Denise had already listed it for appraisal, but she allowed him to keep it until the next morning. Brian followed him outside. The evening had turned cold, and the porch light shone across the bare patch where Robert's boots used to sit. "Do you have somewhere?" Brian asked. "No. You could ask around." "Thanks." Brian flinched. "I meant I can ask around. Your mother gave me until morning. She's stressed. Grandpa died." "I know. Does she?" Brian looked back at the house. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Make me choose a side while everybody's upset." Dustin lifted the duffel into the truck bed. You came here on her side. He drove away before Brian answered. There were 2 motels near the highway. The cheaper one wanted $68 before tax. Dustin thanked the clerk and left. He parked near the city lake for an hour, but a sign prohibited overnight parking. He considered calling Holly Chandler, then decided it was too late. He didn't know Scott Frazier well enough to ask for a couch. Scott had worked with Robert, but Dustin had only spoken to him a few times. At 10:30, Dustin drove to the Starlight. The chain at the entrance wasn't locked yet. Gregory had looped it through the posts without fastening the padlock. Dustin opened it, drove through, and closed it behind him. His headlights swept over weeds, cracked pavement, and empty speaker poles. The ticket booth stood just inside the entrance, small enough to look forgotten beneath the open sky. Dustin parked beside it. The door resisted until he put his shoulder against it. Damp wood dragged across the floor. Something moved in the dark, and he stepped back quickly, but it was only a field mouse escaping through a hole near the wall. He used his phone light. The booth smelled of wet plywood and old dust. Leaves had blown under the door. A strip of ceiling panel hung loose above the counter. The floor dipped under his right boot, and rainwater had collected in one corner. The county hadn't exaggerated every problem. Dustin set down his duffel and pressed both hands against the counter. It stayed firm. The wall framing looked better above the rotten lower boards. Robert had built the cabinet along the back with Scott, fitted tightly into a space barely wide enough for one person to turn around. A gust struck the booth. The loose roof panel lifted with a hard clap. Dustin went outside and found a blue tarp behind the concession building. He dragged over 2 concrete blocks, climbed onto the truck's tailgate, and stretched the tarp across the weak side of the roof. The wind fought him. One block slipped and nearly took his fingers with it. When he finished, the tarp sagged badly, but the panel stopped lifting. He sat inside the booth with his back against the cabinet. Robert's coat covered his knees. His duffel served as a pillow. This was what $6 had bought him. A condemned box on land his aunt was selling, with 10 days before the county could crush it. His phone showed 11:14. He opened Scott Frazier's number, which Robert had written on a card near the kitchen telephone months earlier. Dustin had added it to his contacts without knowing why. He typed a message, erased it, and called. Scott answered after 4 rings. Dustin, I'm sorry it's late. Are you all right? Dustin looked at the boarded window, the wet floor, and the orange notice moving in the draft. No, he said, but I bought Grandpa's ticket booth. There was a pause. You bought what? The booth at the Starlight. Denise sold it to me for $6. I have 10 days to move it. Scott was quiet again, but this silence felt different. He knew exactly which booth Dustin meant. Where are you now? Inside it? At the drive-in? Yes. Scott let out a breath. Don't touch the wiring. Robert disconnected most of it, but most isn't all. I need somewhere to put it. I've got space behind my workshop. Dustin sat up. You do? Enough if we clear the scrap racks. Moving it is the harder part. I'll work. I can pay you when I find a job. I didn't ask for money. Everybody asks eventually. Scott didn't answer that. I'll bring the flatbed at 7. Dustin looked at the narrow cabinet beside him. The wood was scratched, swollen near the floor, and still solid where Robert's hands had fitted the joints. Why would he build something this carefully if it was only going to sit out here? Scott took a moment before replying. That's a good question, he said. Tomorrow, we'll take a closer look. The call ended, and the booth went quiet except for the tarp rubbing against the roof. Dustin slept for perhaps an hour at a time. Every passing truck woke him. The booth shifted in the wind, making small wooden complaints around him. At 4 a.m, cold water found its way through the tarp and landed on his forehead. By 6, he had stopped trying to sleep. He walked the drive-in lot while the eastern sky turned pale. He checked the booth from every side and made a list on his phone. Rotten bottom boards, loose roof edge, broken door hinge, one cracked pane behind the plywood. The whole structure leaned slightly toward the entrance road. It was more damage than he could fix in 10 days. That didn't mean he had to fix it there. He decided on one thing. The booth would leave the Starlight that morning. Whatever came after could wait. Scott's truck arrived at 6:53, pulling a flatbed trailer with low sides. A red hydraulic jack, timber blocks, and several heavy straps lay across the bed. Scott climbed out wearing coveralls over a gray sweatshirt. He was a broad man with a close brown beard and sawdust caught in the cuffs of his clothes. At 44, he moved with the careful speed of someone who worked around blades and heavy machinery every day. His first look was at Dustin. His second was at the booth. "You really slept in there?" "Some." Scott walked to the door and looked inside. "I told you not to touch the wiring." "I didn't." "Good. I put a tarp on the roof. I see that." "That count as touching the wiring?" Scott gave him a level look. "You always this lively without coffee?" "There's a coffee maker in the concession stand. There's also probably something living in it." Scott brought 2 paper cups from the truck. He handed one to Dustin, then crouched beside the lowest corner of the booth. "Robert and I put treated runners under this," he said. "They should still be there." "You helped build the whole thing?" "The cabinets and counter. He framed most of the shell before he called me." "Why'd he rebuild it after the drive-in was already slowing down?" Scott scraped away dirt with a pry bar. "Because the old booth fell apart." "That's the reason he gave?" "It's the reason he needed." Dustin waited for more. Scott found the edge of a timber runner and tapped it with the bar. The sound was firm. "He liked having projects," Scott said. "After your grandmother died, he liked them even more. A job gave him somewhere to be." Dustin had never known his grandmother. There were pictures of her behind the concession counter, smiling through the old ticket window, but Robert rarely spoke about that part of his life. Scott moved to the other side. "This runner's sound, too. That helps. Can we lift it?" "We can try. First, we need to know whether it'll stay together." They removed the plywood covering the windows. One pane was intact. The other had a crack running from the upper corner to the middle. Scott covered both sides with packing tape, then screwed the plywood back over it. Dustin cleared leaves and trash from the floor. Beneath the counter, he found an old plastic flashlight, 2 faded rolls of tickets, and a paper cup that had become soft with damp. The cabinet doors stuck but opened when he pulled hard. One held a bundle of electrical cable. The other held a mouse nest made from ticket stubs and strips of insulation. Scott leaned through the door. "Don't reach into that. I wasn't going to. You had your hand 6 inches from it. I was looking." "Look from farther away." They carried the nest outside with a shovel. Scott disconnected the remaining power line at the rear wall and capped it, though the line had already been cut near the old service pole. By 8, the sun was above the screen tower. The cold eased, and Dustin took off Robert's coat. He folded it over the passenger seat of the truck. Scott noticed the labels Gregory had placed on the dashboard and door frame. "They taking the truck?" "This morning." "You tell Denise where you slept?" "No." "You should." "Why?" So she has to hear herself answer. Dustin closed the door harder than he meant to. She already answered. Scott didn't push. He set the jack beneath the front runner and pumped the handle. The booth rose an inch. Dust and dry dirt broke away beneath it. Dustin slid a timber block under the runner. "Hands on the sides," Scott said. "Never under." They repeated the work at the back, raising each corner a little at a time. The weak wall creaked when they reached 3 inches. Scott stopped. "Inside. Lower left corner. Tell me if that brace moves." Dustin crouched beside the cabinet. A diagonal support ran from the floor toward the door frame. "Ready." Scott pumped once. The brace pulled away from the wall by the width of a fingernail. It moved. Scott lowered the jack. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Dustin knew what Scott was seeing. A booth that might split when the winch pulled it. A roof that could twist. An entire morning spent preparing something that still had no reason to cooperate. "What do we need?" Dustin asked, more bracing. "How much?" 4 lengths of lumber, bolts, washers, maybe $80? "I have 37. Scott rubbed the side of his beard. "I can work it off. I've heard that offer twice already. I mean it. I know. That's why it's a problem." Dustin looked at him. Scott stood. "People who mean it work until the debt feels bigger than the favor. Then nobody knows how to stop. I'm not asking you to give me anything. You called me from a condemned booth at 11 at night. I asked for space. And I said yes." Scott took his phone from his pocket. He called the lumberyard and ordered what they needed under his business account. Dustin started to object. Scott held up one hand. "You can help me finish a walnut reception desk this week. It's due Friday, and my regular helper is out with a bad shoulder. We'll count hours. Fair?" "Fair. This doesn't make you my employee. I can't afford another employee." "Understood. And if you sand through the veneer, you owe me more than $80. Scott drove to collect the lumber. Dustin stayed with the booth, removing loose trim and marking the sound sections with a pencil. A black sport utility vehicle entered the lot before Scott returned. Denise was driving. Gregory sat beside her, and Brian was in the back. They parked near Robert's truck. Gregory got out holding the spare key. We agreed on 9. Dustin checked his phone. It was 8:41. I'm not stopping you. Gregory examined the jack and timber blocks. Where did these come from? Scott? You called Fraser? Yes. Denise stepped out. Her funeral clothes were gone. She wore jeans and a cream sweater, as if this were a normal family errand. You should have asked before bringing somebody onto the property. I own the booth. You don't own the ground under it. The chain wasn't locked. That doesn't mean the place is open. Brian looked inside the booth. You stayed here? Dustin kept tightening a screw in the loose door trim. Denise stared at the folded coat in the truck. You could have called. You told me there were motels. I didn't tell you to sleep in this. You didn't ask where I went? Gregory opened the driver's door of Robert's truck. We're not doing this again. He removed Dustin's bag from behind the seat and set it on the ground. Then he took the appraisal labels from the dashboard and slid into the driver's seat. Robert's coat was still on the passenger side. My coat, Dustin said. Gregory picked it up by the collar and held it through the window. Dustin took it. Denise opened her purse. I can give you some money for a room. Dustin looked at her hand but didn't take the wallet. A loan? He asked. No. Estate money? My money. Then no. Don't be childish. I bought the booth. I'm moving it. That's what you wanted. What I wanted was for you to be reasonable. Gregory started the truck. The engine gave the familiar rough shake Robert had never gotten around to fixing. Denise lowered her voice. There's no prize for making this harder. Dustin put on the coat. I'm not trying to win anything. Scott returned with lumber tied above the bed of his truck. He slowed when he saw the family. Gregory drove away in Robert's truck without greeting him. Denise watched Scott park. You understand that structure is condemned. Scott climbed out. I understand the order says it has to leave this property. If it falls apart on the road, that's not the estate's responsibility. It won't be on a public road unless it's secured. Heartland Crossroads is sending another survey crew tomorrow. I need the entrance clear. It'll be clear today. She looked from Scott to Dustin. Make sure it is. Brian remained near the booth after his mother returned to the vehicle. You need a ride? He asked Dustin. I have one. You gonna stay at Scott's? Dustin glanced at Scott, who was unloading lumber and pretending not to hear. I'm working that out. Brian nodded. He placed one hand on the counter through the doorway. I remember this being bigger. You were bigger than me, not by much. By 7 years. Brian brushed dust from his palm. My parents are under pressure with the land sale. From who? The buyer, the bank. I don't know. What bank? Brian's face changed. It was small, but Dustin saw it. I just mean everybody has bills. You said the bank. I don't know their business. Then why did you say it? Denise called from the vehicle. Brian, he stepped away from the booth. Be careful with Scott, he said quietly. He has reasons to keep close to anything Grandpa owned. What reasons? But Brian was already walking back to the vehicle. Scott waited until they left. What was that about? He says you have reasons. I do. Dustin studied him. Scott placed 2 boards against the booth wall. My workshop is in the basement of the Bellwether building. Robert was my landlord. If Denise gets control of the building, I need to know what happens to my lease. Dustin frowned. What building? The limestone one on Main? Chandler's Mercantile is on the ground floor. I thought you rented your workshop from Holly. No, Robert owned the building. Dustin thought of the will reading, the house, the accounts, the drive-in, and the list of personal property. Angel had never mentioned a building on Main Street. Are you sure? I've written rent checks to him every month since 2015. Denise didn't say anything about it. That doesn't mean much. She hasn't spoken to me. Why wasn't it in the will? Scott measured the brace. That's a question for the attorney. Did Grandpa talk about selling it? No. Did he tell you what happens now? No. Dustin heard the frustration under the answers. Scott wasn't helping only because Robert had once helped him. His workshop, tools, orders, and income sat beneath a building whose future had become unclear. If Denise owns it, can she throw you out? I have a lease through next spring. After that, yes. And you still gave me space there? The loading yard is part of my lease. That isn't what I meant. Scott marked the board. Robert gave me a chance when I needed one. It seems fair to give you room for a ticket booth. They installed braces across the weak wall and inside the door frame. Dustin drilled while Scott held the boards. The old battery in the drill died after the third hole, so Scott brought out a corded one from his truck. Near noon, they attached the winch cable to both runners. Scott positioned the trailer directly in front of the booth. Dustin stood inside, watching every joint as the cable tightened. "Slow," he called. Scott operated the winch in short pulls. The booth slid 6 inches, stopped, then moved again. One runner caught on broken pavement. They lifted it, placed a sheet of plywood beneath it, and tried again. The structure reached the trailer without splitting. Once it was centered, they crossed 4 straps over the roof and secured the lower frame with chains. Scott pushed against each wall. Nothing shifted. Dustin ran his hand over the counter before closing the door. The counter had been wiped thousands of times. Its front edge was worn smooth, where people had rested their arms while waiting for change. It was the one part of the booth that didn't feel ruined. Scott followed his hand. "Robert made me redo that edge." What was wrong with it? He said it felt like a bank counter. What did he want it to feel like? A place where somebody handed you a ticket. That sounds like him. He was particular about the drawers, too. Beneath the counter were 2 wooden drawers. One opened easily and held nothing but dirt. The second moved an inch, then caught. Dustin pulled harder. "Don't," Scott said. "We'll deal with it at the shop." The trip into town took 20 minutes because Scott avoided the highway and kept below 30 miles an hour. Dustin rode beside him, turning in his seat at every corner to check the booth through the rear window. They entered Main Street from the south. The Bellwether building stood near the middle of the block, 3 stories of pale limestone with tall upper windows. Chandler's Mercantile occupied the larger storefront. The smaller shop beside it was closed for the day, though a painted sign offered alterations and clothing repair. Scott turned into the alley and back through a gate. The rear yard held stacks of covered lumber, a metal storage container, and a wide basement entrance with double doors. They lowered the trailer ramps and used the winch to ease the booth onto timber blocks near the fence. When the last strap came off, Dustin placed both hands against the wall. It stood level. Scott checked his watch. "I have to work on that reception desk. I'll start cleaning. No power tools unless I'm out here." "Understood." Scott went through the basement doors. A table saw started a minute later. Dustin swept the booth twice. He scrubbed the counter with warm water from the workshop sink, then removed the first drawer and cleaned beneath it. The stuck drawer still bothered him. He knelt and shone the old flashlight into the cabinet. The runners were straight. Nothing obvious blocked them. He pressed upward on the drawer while pulling. It moved another inch and stopped. Scott came outside carrying 2 clamps. "You're still at that?" "It isn't swollen. Something's holding it." Scott set down the clamps and examined the cabinet from below. "This back rail is newer than the sides." "You built it." "I built the cabinet box." "Robert installed the drawers after I left." "Why?" "Said he wanted to fuss with them." Scott reached inside and pressed a narrow strip of wood beneath the runner. A soft click came from the back. The drawer slid open. It was empty. Dustin looked at Scott. That was a lot of trouble for nothing. Scott ran his finger along the drawer's inside edge. "The bottom's too shallow." He lifted one corner with the tip of a chisel. A thin panel rose from the drawer, revealing a narrow space beneath it. Inside lay a stamped brass key and a torn piece of paper folded around it. Dustin recognized Robert's handwriting before he opened the note. For Dustin, it read, "Ask Holly about the room above Chan." The rest had been torn away. He turned the key over in his palm. Along one side, 3 words had been stamped into the brass. "Bellwether, 3rd floor." Dustin read the stamp twice. Did Grandpa have a room there? Scott took the key from him and rubbed away a film of dark wax with his thumb. "There's a 3rd floor? I've never been in it." "You've worked in that building for 11 years. I lease the basement, not every locked door." Dustin folded the note along its old crease. The torn edge looked rough, not cut. Whatever had once followed Chan was gone. "Chandler's," he said. "That would be my guess." The table saw in the basement was still running. Scott glanced toward the doors. "I need half an hour to glue that desk before the joints dry." "Go, don't disappear. I'm walking 50 feet. You said that, like, disappearing 50 feet isn't possible." Dustin put the key and note in the inside pocket of Robert's coat. He closed the false panel, then opened it again to understand the catch. A thin wooden tongue ran beneath the right drawer guide. Pressing it released a spring near the back. The mechanism had been made to stay hidden. Robert had installed it after Scott left, then placed a key inside with Dustin's name on the note. That part was impossible to dismiss as sentiment. Robert had expected him to find it, or at least hoped he would. Dustin waited while Scott finished the glue-up. They clamped the walnut top to its frame, wiped away the excess, and covered the piece with a clean cloth. Scott washed his hands at the deep utility sink. "If Holly's busy, we don't push," he said. "Her afternoon delivery comes around 2. You think she knows about the key?" I think Robert trusted her. "That isn't what I asked. It's the answer I have." They entered Chandler's Mercantile through the rear door. A brass bell rang above them. The store smelled of coffee beans, cedar soap, and the cinnamon candles Holly kept near the register. Shelves ran nearly to the stamped metal ceiling. One side held kitchen goods and folded towels. The other held local books, jars of candy, postcards, and things tourists bought because they liked the town name printed on them. Holly stood behind the counter wrapping a ceramic bowl in brown paper. Her gray hair was pinned behind her head with 2 wooden sticks. Small reading glasses rested low on her nose. She looked at Scott first. "If this is about the delivery door, I already moved the boxes." "It isn't." Then she saw Dustin. Her hands stopped around the bowl. "Oh, honey." Holly came around the counter and held him for several seconds. Dustin hadn't cried at the hospital or the funeral. He didn't cry then either, but his throat closed when her palm pressed between his shoulders. She stepped back and studied his face. "Did you eat today?" "Coffee." "That's not food." Scott brought it. "That explains why it wasn't food." Scott leaned against a display of cast iron pans. "I'm standing right here. I know where you're standing. Move before you knock down my skillets." Holly took a turkey sandwich from the refrigerated case and placed it on the counter. Dustin reached for his wallet. "Don't," she said. "I can pay. I know. Don't." A customer carrying a basket came to the register. Dustin ate near the front window, while Holly rang up tea and a set of dish towels. Outside, Main Street moved through an ordinary Monday afternoon. A delivery van blocked half the road. 2 women stopped beneath the Mercantile awning to look at their phones. Across the street, someone was replacing letters on a bank sign. Dustin could see the upper floors reflected in the shop window. The Bellwether building had 6 tall windows across the second floor and 4 across the third. The third-floor glass looked darker. When the customer left, Holly locked the front door and turned the sign to "back in 15 minutes." "I don't close for lunch," she said, "so this must be important." Dustin took the note from his pocket and placed it on the counter. Holly didn't touch it at first. "Where did you get that?" "Inside the ticket booth." Her eyes moved to Scott. "It was under a false bottom," he said. Robert built the release into the drawer. Holly picked up the note by its edges. She read the single line and pressed her lips together. "You recognize the writing?" Dustin asked. "Of course I do." "Did he tell you he left something there?" "No." "Did he talk about a room upstairs?" Holly removed her glasses and cleaned them on the edge of her blouse, though the lenses weren't dirty. Robert talked around things. He could make a plain answer take half a year. "What did he say?" She put her glasses back on. "Show me whatever else you found." Dustin placed the brass key beside the note. Holly inhaled softly. She turned the key so the stamp faced the light. "That's an old building key. You've seen it?" "Not this one." "The stamp matches the others Robert used." Scott straightened. "Others?" "Basement, storefronts, rear entrance." He had them made by a locksmith in Manhattan because he didn't like the new blanks from the hardware store. "You knew he owned the building," Dustin said. "I've known since I signed my first lease." "Why didn't Denise?" Holly looked toward the locked front door. "You'll have to ask her." "I did." "Not about this, but about what Grandpa owned. The building wasn't mentioned. That doesn't mean she knew. She's executor. That still doesn't mean Robert told her everything." Dustin heard the caution in Holly's voice. It wasn't fear exactly. She had run a business on Main Street for 30 years and knew how quickly a private argument could become public talk. She also had a store beneath whatever Robert had hidden. "What did he say about me?" Dustin asked. Holly slid the key back across the counter. "Not much until your mother died. After you moved in, he said you noticed when things needed doing. That sounds like something he'd say about a mop. It was high praise from Robert. Did he say the building was mine?" No. The answer came cleanly. Dustin looked down at the note. Holly reached across the counter. He said he'd set something aside for the boy. Those were his words. He said it more than once. When? The first time was years ago. The last time was in March. What did he mean? He wouldn't tell me. Did you ask? Many times. Scott looked upward toward the ceiling. Did he mean something in this building? I believed he did. Why? Holly hesitated. Because every time he said it, he looked at those stairs. The stairs were behind a narrow door near the rear stockroom. Dustin had passed them without noticing. Holly took a ring of keys from beneath the register and unlocked the door. A dim landing waited beyond it. One flight went down toward the basement. Another climbed beside the limestone wall. I have a delivery coming, Holly said. We look, then I come back down. Dustin followed her. Scott came last and pulled the door closed. The second-floor landing opened into a wide hallway with 4 empty rooms. Old frosted lettering remained on 2 doors. One had once been an accounting office. Another had been a dentist's suite. Dust covered the floor, but the fire extinguisher beside the stairs had been inspected that spring. Robert used these rooms for storage, Holly said. He kept old Starlight equipment in the back. At the far end, stacked folding chairs blocked one doorway. Dustin could see boxes of film reels and a popcorn machine beneath a sheet. The stairs continued upward. At the third-floor landing, they found a solid oak door with no sign. The lock was set into a newer brass plate. Dustin tried Holly's key ring first at her suggestion. None fit. Then he used the stamped key. It turned halfway and stopped. He pushed against the door. Lift as you turn, Scott said. Dustin lifted the handle. The bolt drew back with a heavy click. The room beyond was dark. Holly found a switch near the frame, and a row of shaded lights came on one by one. It wasn't storage. The loft ran across most of the third floor. Limestone walls had been cleaned and sealed. Wide wood planks covered the floor. A small kitchen stood along one wall, with green cabinets, a white refrigerator, and a round table set beneath the windows. At the other end was a sitting area with a worn leather sofa, 2 bookcases, and a cast-iron stove. A bed stood behind a half wall. It had a folded quilt at the foot and no sheets. Dustin entered slowly. Everything looked used but orderly. A coffee mug sat upside down beside the sink. Work gloves rested on the table. On the wall hung a framed Starlight poster, advertising a double feature from 1989. Scott checked the thermostat. Heat's on. Holly stayed near the door. I knew he was fixing rooms up here, she said. I didn't know he'd made a home. Did he live here? Dustin asked. Not that I know of. Scott opened a cabinet above the sink. It held 4 plates, 4 cups, and a box of tea. Somebody spent time here. Dustin crossed to the bookcases. Robert's books filled 2 shelves, repair manuals, Kansas history, old movie guides, and 3 mysteries with receipts used as bookmarks. A photograph of Dustin stood between them. It had been taken the previous summer. He was on a ladder painting the concession stand trim, looking annoyed because Robert had told him to stop and smile. He picked it up. Why would he keep this here? Holly came closer. Maybe he liked it. He had pictures at home. People can keep pictures in 2 places. On a small desk near the bed, Dustin found a yellow legal pad. The top page held measurements for curtains and a list of repairs. Replace north window latch, check water pressure, finish closet shelves. Below that, Robert had written Dustin's name, then crossed it out. Nothing followed. Scott opened the desk drawer. Bills. They were utility statements addressed to Robert at the Bellwether building. Beneath them were property tax receipts carrying his name and the building's parcel description. Dustin read one of the receipts. This means he owned it. It means the county billed him, Scott said, which supports what Holly and I already told you, but it doesn't say why my key opens this room. No? Dustin turned to Holly. Did Denise ever come up here? Not through my store. Gregory? No. Brian? Not that I saw. The answer should have made the room feel safer. It didn't. The key had been hidden because Robert didn't want it found easily. The building had been kept out of family conversation. Now Robert was dead, and the woman controlling his estate had given Dustin until morning to leave the only home he knew. Scott examined the loft's rear windows. You shouldn't move anything. I wasn't planning to. Even the photograph. Dustin realized he was still holding it. He placed it back on the shelf. Holly's delivery truck sounded its horn in the alley. I have to go. She walked to the door, then looked back at Dustin. Lock this when you leave. Don't tell anyone who doesn't need to know. Why? Because you don't know what it means yet. They went downstairs 10 minutes later. Holly returned to the register, while Scott helped the delivery driver carry boxes inside. Dustin called Angel from the stockroom. She answered on the second ring. I found something in property that belonged to Grandpa, he said. What kind of something? A key and a note with my name. The key opens a loft in the Bellwether building. Angel was silent long enough that Dustin checked the phone. Are you there? Yes. Don't remove any documents. I haven't. Don't give the key to Denise. Why? Because I need to determine whether that building belongs to the estate. Scott and Holly say Grandpa owned it. That isn't the same as knowing how he held title. What does that mean? It means he could have owned it personally, through a company or through a trust. It also could have been transferred before his death. To who? I don't know. Dustin lowered his voice. Why wasn't it read with the will? Because the building wasn't on the asset summary Denise provided. Did you know about it? I knew Robert had business downtown. I didn't prepare the property list. Who did? Denise and Gregory brought it to the meeting. Dustin looked through the stockroom door. Scott was stacking cartons while Holly checked the invoice. What do I do? Bring me the note and key tomorrow morning. I'll pull the county records before you arrive. After the call, Dustin returned to the yard. He found a bucket and began washing the outside of the ticket booth. Mud ran from the siding in dark lines. Scott worked in the basement. Holly reopened the store. For almost an hour, nothing happened. Then Denise's vehicle stopped in the alley. She came through the gate alone. I brought you something, she said. She carried a plastic grocery bag containing deodorant, a toothbrush, 2 pairs of socks, and a prepaid card for a motel. Dustin set down the scrub brush. Thank you. Her eyes moved over the booth. Scott made good time. Yes. Where is he? Working. She held out the bag. Dustin took it. You don't have to make everything a fight, she said. I thanked you. I know. I'm talking about all of this. She gestured toward the booth, then the building. Dustin watched her face. Why didn't you list the Bellwether building? Her expression stayed still for 1 second too long. What are you talking about? Grandpa owned it. Dad rented storage downtown. He paid the property taxes. Who told you that? Holly and Scott knew he owned it. Denise looked toward the mercantile's rear door. What have you been going through? Why didn't you list it? I listed everything I knew about. Angel says you and Gregory made the asset summary. You called Angel? Yes. Denise pressed her lips together. The concern left her voice. If you found papers belonging to the estate, you need to give them to me. I found a note belonging to me. What did it say? Dustin picked up the scrub brush again. You said you didn't know about the building. I knew he kept things here. I didn't know he owned it. Then why are you worried about what the note says? Denise stared at him. Behind her, the loft windows reflected the afternoon sun, giving nothing away. Finally, she pointed at the grocery bag. The motel card is good for 2 nights. Then she walked back through the gate, already taking out her phone. She didn't look back before turning onto Main Street. Dustin carried the grocery bag into the workshop. Scott was fitting a drawer front to the walnut desk. He looked up when Dustin placed the motel card beside the sink. She bought me 2 nights. That's almost thoughtful. Almost. Scott set down his pencil. What did she want? To know what the note said. Did you tell her? No. Good. Dustin waited for Scott to ask what happened next. Instead, Scott handed him a sanding block and showed him how to work along the grain without rounding the corners. They stayed until 7. The repetition helped. Measure, check, sand, check again. The walnut dust smelled warm and faintly sweet. When Dustin's thoughts moved upstairs, Scott pointed out a rough spot or gave him another piece. Holly brought down soup in 2 lidded containers before closing her store. You're both too thin, she said. Scott looked at his stomach. That's plainly untrue. Then Dustin can have yours. She left without mentioning Denise. Dustin ate at Scott's workbench. Afterward, Scott drove him to the motel at the edge of town. The room had a humming air conditioner, a stiff brown blanket, and a television remote held together with clear tape. It was still the safest place Dustin had slept since Thursday. He set the brass key and Robert's note on the bedside table. At 9:16, Brian called. Dustin let it ring twice before answering. Did you tell Mom about the building? Brian asked. She came to see me. She says Holly and Scott are putting ideas in your head. They showed me a door. What door? You don't know? No. Dustin could hear Gregory speaking in the background. Brian moved somewhere quieter. Mom wants you to stop going through Grandpa's things until the estate inventory is done. The things I found had my name on them. What things? If she didn't tell you, ask her. This is what I mean. Everybody's talking around each other. Then say what you called to say. Brian went silent. Finally, he said, "Be careful. Dad thinks you're trying to interfere with a drive-in sale. How would a room downtown interfere with 50 acres outside town?" "I don't know. You keep saying that." "Because they don't tell me everything." Dustin looked at the note. "Why did they bring you to the drive-in this morning?" "To get the other vehicle home." "They had 2 drivers." Brian didn't answer. "They wanted you to watch me," Dustin said. "That's not fair. Is it wrong?" Another silence. Brian lowered his voice. "Dad said you might take something and claim you found it in the booth." Dustin sat upright. "He said that before or after I found the key?" "Don't twist it. Did he know I found a key?" "No. I didn't know until now." Dustin closed his eyes. He had given Brian more than Brian had given him. "Forget I said that." "Dustin." He ended the call. The next morning, Scott picked him up before 8. Holly was sweeping the sidewalk when they arrived. She lifted one hand but didn't come over. Angel's office stood 2 blocks from the courthouse above an insurance agency. Dustin and Scott climbed a narrow flight of stairs to a waiting room with 3 blue chairs and a table covered in old farm magazines. Scott stopped at the door. "I'll wait downstairs. You can come in. This is family business. You're already in it." Scott considered that, then followed him. Angel had printed a stack of county records and spread them across a small conference table. She wore a green blouse and had tied her hair back. 2 cups of coffee sat near her laptop, both untouched. Dustin placed the key and note in front of her. She read the note without moving it, then examined the stamp on the key. "Who else has handled these?" "Scott." Holly held the note. "Denise?" "No." Angel took several photographs with her phone. "Tell me exactly where you found them." Dustin described the false drawer, including the hidden release beneath the runner. Scott explained which parts of the cabinet he and Robert had built and which parts Robert finished alone. "When was that?" Angel asked. 2016, Scott said. "Late summer. I can check my job calendar for the week." "Do that. Keep the original calendar." "What does the cabinet matter?" Dustin asked. "It helps establish that the hiding place existed years before Robert died. If this becomes a dispute, timing matters." Angel turned one of the county records toward him. The page showed a photograph of the Bellwether building, its parcel number, and a short property history. "Robert bought the building in 1994, she said. "He paid $72,000. "By himself?" "That deed lists only him." Scott leaned over the page. "No mortgage?" "The county record doesn't show one now. There was a bank lien in the 90s. It was released in 2006. "So he owned it outright," Dustin said. "He did by then." Angel placed another page beside it. "This is where it gets less clear. There's a transfer notation from 2013, but the scanned document isn't available through the public portal. The index identifies Robert as grantor and then identifies him again as trustee." "Trustee of what?" "It doesn't include the trust name in the index." "Could Denise be in it?" "She could. So could you. So could a charity. The public record tells us a deed was filed, not what the private trust says." Dustin looked at his name on Robert's note. "Can you get the deed?" "I ordered a certified copy from the county recorder. It may be ready this afternoon." Scott pointed to the tax address. "This is the building itself." "Yes." Robert had the bills mailed there. "To the Loft," Dustin said. "Possibly." Angel folded her hands. "I need you to understand something. Finding a key doesn't give you ownership. Robert's note shows he intended you to find the room. It doesn't tell us what he intended you to receive. Then why hide it?" "I can't answer that yet. Denise wants me to stop looking. I spoke to her attorney this morning." Dustin looked up. "She has another attorney?" "She retained separate counsel last night." "What for?" "To advise her as executor." "I thought that was your job." "I represented Robert in some estate matters. Denise assumed I would handle the probate filing, but I haven't agreed to represent her personally. Now that your interests may conflict with hers, I won't." "Did you tell her about the trust notation?" "I told her the building may be an omitted asset." Her attorney said that if Robert still controlled it when he died, Denise intends to include it in the estate. And then she gets it? Under the will's remaining property clause, she may argue that. Dustin felt the room narrow around the table. What am I supposed to do with a note and a key against that? Find out what Robert left in the room. Angel slid the key back to him. Take photographs before you move anything. Have Holly and Scott present. If you find legal papers, call me. They returned to the Bellwether building just before 10. Holly had 3 customers in the store. She listened while ringing up a bag of coffee and didn't react until the last customer left. A trust, she said. A possible trust, Scott corrected. Holly removed the cash drawer and locked it beneath the counter. I'm going upstairs. You have a store open, Dustin said. I also have 30 years tied to this building. She turned the sign to back in 15 minutes again. Upstairs, the loft looked exactly as they had left it. Dustin photographed the door before opening it, then recorded the room slowly from the threshold. Scott checked the windows. Holly opened the kitchen drawers. They searched without taking anything out of the loft. The desk held bills, receipts, pencils, and 2 blank notebooks. The bookcase had no loose panels. The kitchen cabinets held dishes and dry food well past its date. Dustin checked beneath the bed and found 3 flat storage boxes. One held old Starlight programs. Another held Christmas decorations. The third contained curtain fabric, still folded around the store receipt. Scott studied Robert's repair list. Finished closet shelves, he read. The closet stood behind the half wall near the bed. Dustin had opened it the day before and seen coats, a broom, and several rough pine shelves. Scott removed the coats. Those aren't unfinished? What? The shelves. They're finished. He ran his hand along the front edge. Sanded, sealed, fixed to the cleats. Robert wouldn't have left that line on the list. Maybe he forgot to cross it out. Robert crossed out, by T. Holly stood in the closet doorway. He did enjoy an accurate list. Dustin took out his phone and photographed the shelves. He removed the broom and a cardboard box of cleaning supplies. The back wall had been covered in narrow wood panels. All were the same width except one near the floor. That panel was half an inch narrower, with a dark line along its right edge. Scott tapped it with one knuckle. The first knock sounded solid. The second sounded hollow. He looked at Dustin. There's space behind it. They searched for a latch. None was visible. Dustin pressed the corners, then pulled on the lowest shelf. It didn't move. Holly crouched and pointed to a small knot in the wood. That's too round. Dustin pressed it. The knot sank beneath his thumb. The narrow panel released and tilted forward. Behind it was a steel safe set into the stone wall. It was small, about the size of a microwave, with a turning dial and a brass handle. No manufacturer's label remained on the front. Scott took out his phone and began recording. Don't touch the dial yet. Dustin kept his hands at his sides. Did either of you know this was here? He asked. No, Scott said. Holly shook her head. They photographed the safe, the panel, the closet, and the shelf mechanism. Dustin called Angel. Is it locked? She asked. Yes. Do you see a keyhole? No, just a combination dial. Don't force it. Look for a number Robert would expect you to know. Dustin searched the desk again. He checked the legal pad, receipts, book margins, and the backs of photographs. Scott examined the closet for marks. Holly went downstairs long enough to put a handwritten sign on the store door, saying she would reopen at 11. When she returned, Dustin was holding the framed Starlight poster. Across the bottom were the old theater's details. Route 57. Gates open at 7. Established 1968. The drive-in, he said. Scott looked at the safe. 4 numbers. Dustin knelt before the dial. He turned it carefully, following the standard sequence Angel had described over the phone. 1960. 8 wouldn't work on a 2-digit dial as one number, so he tried 68. The handle didn't move. He tried 68, 19, then 68 again. Nothing. Holly stood behind him. Robert's father opened the Starlight in 1968. Robert always said the year together, not split apart. Dustin reset the dial. He tried 19, 68, 19. The brass handle moved. Nobody spoke. Dustin pulled it down and opened the safe. Inside sat a coffee can with a plastic lid, a thick document envelope, a folded deed, and a smaller envelope with his name written across it. The coffee can was heavy. Through a crack in the lid, he saw the edges of old silver dollars. Scott kept recording as Dustin lifted out the document envelope. On the front, Robert had written Bellwether Trust, signed original. Dustin placed it on the closet floor and opened the flap. The first page had been notarized in 2013. Robert's signature appeared above a raised seal. Dustin read the title, then the first paragraph, but the words ran together. "Find the beneficiary page," Angel said through the phone. Scott helped him turn the pages without separating them. Near the back, they found a section labeled Distribution Upon Death. Dustin read it aloud. "Upon the death of Robert Peterson, all interest held by this trust in the Bellwether building and its associated parcel shall pass to Dustin Peterson as sole beneficiary." His voice stopped on his own name. Holly sat down on the lowest closet shelf. Scott lowered the phone slightly, then raised it again. Angel spoke from the table where Dustin had placed his phone. "Keep reading." The next line stated that no executor of Robert's general estate had authority to sell, transfer, mortgage, or manage the Bellwether property after his death. Dustin looked at the smaller envelope. Robert's handwriting covered the front. "For Dustin alone. Read when you know the building is yours." He didn't open it. Beneath the trust lay the matching deed, transferring the building to Robert as trustee. The parcel number matched Angel's county record. Dustin sat on the floor with the papers across his knees. "Does this mean Denise can't take it?" Angel answered carefully. "If these originals are valid, and if the trust wasn't revoked or replaced, the building passed to you when Robert died." Holly covered her mouth with one hand. Scott looked around the loft as if its walls had moved. Dustin held the page carrying his name. That morning, he had entered Angel's office with a key to a room he didn't understand. Now, he might own the entire building around them. But the word might mattered. Denise had retained an attorney. She had already moved to pull the property into Robert's estate. Angel told them to leave the silver dollars and letter in the safe. Scott recorded Dustin returning both. They carried only the trust and deed downstairs in a document box Holly supplied. At the loft door, Dustin turned back. The photograph of him on the ladder still stood between Robert's books. The room no longer looked like a secret Robert had kept from him. It looked like a decision Robert had made for him, and one the rest of the family was already preparing to fight. He locked the door and carried the document box downstairs. Angel met them at her office entrance. She took the box herself and led them into the conference room. Before touching anything, she photographed the trust and deed from every side. "Scott's video shows where they came from," she said. Holly witnessed the opening. "That gives us a clear history." "A history of what?" Dustin asked. "Who found the documents, where they were, and who handled them? It makes it harder for someone to claim they appeared yesterday." Scott opened his phone calendar. He found the ticket booth work under August of 2016. Robert's name appeared beside 3 entries for cabinet labor, each marked paid. Angel photographed those too. "The county is preparing the certified deed," she said. "I'll compare it with this one. I also need the notary record checked. How long?" "A few days if nobody makes it difficult." Dustin looked at the trust. "Denise already hired someone." "Yes. So she'll make it difficult." Angel didn't disagree. She read the document while they waited. The only sounds were turning pages and traffic below the window. Dustin watched her face, but she gave away very little. Finally, she rested both hands on the table. "This appears properly drafted. Robert signed as settler and trustee. The Bellwether property is listed in the attached schedule. You're named sole beneficiary at his death. Then it's mine. If the trust remained in effect, yes. You keep saying, if, because I haven't completed the work." Holly folded her arms. "Robert kept the signed original in a safe with the deed. That supports it strongly, and wrote Dustin's name in the document. That supports it more strongly. How much stronger does it need to be?" Angel looked at Holly over the top of the pages. "Strong enough to survive Denise's attorney." The answer settled the room. Dustin thought of the envelope still inside the wall. The letter might explain it. It might. "You told me to leave it there. I told you to preserve the safe as you found it. Now we've documented the contents. You can retrieve a letter addressed to you." They returned to the loft after Holly closed for the evening. Scott brought a work light. Though the ceiling fixtures were enough, Nobody wanted the room falling into shadow while the safe stood open. Dustin removed the smaller envelope. Robert had sealed it with ordinary clear tape and written across the flap so it would be obvious if anyone opened it. For Dustin alone. Read when you know the building is yours. The trust said the building was his. Angel's caution still echoed behind that sentence, but Dustin understood what Robert had meant. He had wanted the legal answer found before the personal one. Dustin sat at the round kitchen table. You don't have to read it with us here, Holly said. I want people to hear it. Scott took a chair near the window. Holly sat opposite Dustin. Angel remained standing beside the counter with her phone face down. Dustin broke the tape. The letter covered 4 pages of lined paper. Robert's handwriting grew tighter near the bottom of each page, then opened again at the top of the next. Dustin began quietly. Dear Dustin, if you're reading this in the loft, then you found the booth key, and you were stubborn enough to follow it. I counted on that. Scott looked down at his hands. Dustin continued. The building is yours. I bought it in 1994 because Main Street had enough empty windows already. Holly took the first storefront in 1996, and she kept her lights on when plenty of others went dark. Scott came later and made the basement useful. The rent paid for repairs. I kept the place because it worked better as a home for honest work than it ever would as quick money. Holly removed her glasses and held them in her lap. The next paragraph began with Denise's name. Dustin stopped. Angel said, "Take your time." He read on. In 2007, Denise and Gregory asked me for $150,000 to open a hardware franchise. They had a plan, a location, and promises from people wearing clean shirts. I loaned them the money. I put the loan in writing because family memory changes when money is involved. Holly's eyes lifted to Angel. Dustin's mouth had gone dry. The business failed in 2009. Most of the money was gone. They did not repay the loan. I did not take their house or chase them through court. Denise was my daughter before she was my debtor, and I decided keeping the family standing mattered more than making the account even. Dustin remembered Brian saying the bank was applying pressure. He remembered Gregory carrying a legal envelope into the hospital, and Denise asking about the drive-in before Robert's body had been moved. Robert's letter continued. I learned something from that loss. Money given without a keeper can vanish, even when everybody begins with good intentions. After Joshua died, I worried about what would remain for you if everything I owned passed through the same hands. Your mother loved you and carried more than she should have carried alone. I couldn't promise what life would spare. I could promise you one door that nobody else could close. Dustin pressed the page flat with his palm. In 2013, I placed the Bellwether building into a trust for you. I kept it quiet because I did not want it borrowed against, traded, or used to settle an old disappointment. I remained trustee while I lived. When I died, it became yours. The last page explained the booth. I put the key in the ticket drawer because the starlight taught me what an entrance means. People think the screen is where a movie begins. It isn't. It begins at the little window where somebody decides to let you through. Dustin paused again. Robert had allowed himself one memorable line. He usually distrusted them, especially if they sounded prepared. I knew Denise would take the house and the drive-in. Those arrangements were made long ago, before I understood how quickly the land would be sold. I left them in place because changing everything at the end would turn grief into a contest. The Bellwether was different. I had protected it already. The final paragraph was shorter. Keep Holly and Scott if the arrangements still serve everyone fairly. Don't keep anything only because it was mine. Make it useful. The loft can be your home, but that choice belongs to you. I'm sorry I had to leave before showing you the door myself. Grandpa? Dustin lowered the letter. Nobody spoke for a while. A refrigerator motor came on in the kitchen. The ordinary sound felt strange in a room Robert had prepared so carefully. Holly wiped her glasses with a handkerchief. I knew about the business, she said. I didn't know the amount. Did everybody know? Dustin asked. People knew they opened it. People knew it closed. Robert never discussed the money with me. Scott leaned back. Gregory told people investors backed them. Robert was the investor, Angel said, and apparently the lender. Dustin looked at her. Would there be papers? If Robert said he put it in writing, probably. Would they be in the safe? They weren't with the trust. Dustin checked the envelope again. One smaller sheet remained inside, folded behind the letter. It was a photocopy of a promissory note. Denise and Gregory's signatures appeared at the bottom. The principal amount was $150,000. Payments were to begin 6 months after the franchise opened. A handwritten notation in Robert's writing crossed the upper corner. No payments received. Collection waived personally, but history retained for trust purpose. Angel read it without taking it from Dustin. "This isn't an active collection demand," she said. "Robert chose not to pursue them. It explains his decision, that's all. He didn't leave me their debt. No. He left you a record of why he separated the building." The sound of a key turning downstairs carried through the floor. Holly stood. I locked the shop. Scott moved toward the loft door. Footsteps climbed the stairs. Denise's voice came from the second-floor landing. "Holly?" Gregory answered before Holly could. "Her car's outside." They reached the third-floor door and stopped when they saw everyone at the table. Denise looked from Angel to the open safe. "You had no right to open that." Dustin kept one hand on Robert's letter. "The key was left to me." "You don't know that. My name was on the note." Gregory stepped into the loft. His gaze went straight to the document box. "What did you find?" Angel placed herself between him and the table. "You've retained counsel. Any discussion about ownership needs to include your attorney. This is Robert's property. The recorded owner was a trust." Denise's face lost color. "What trust?" Angel didn't answer. Dustin watched his aunt. She truly hadn't known. Whatever she had feared, it hadn't been the exact thing they found. He turned the beneficiary page so she could see his name. Denise read the first lines. Gregory came beside her and read faster. "No," he said. "This doesn't make sense." "It was signed in 2013, Dustin said. Denise looked at Angel. Dad wasn't well toward the end. "This was 13 years ago, Angel said. He still didn't tell anyone. He notarized it." Gregory pointed toward the page without touching it. "A private document doesn't override the estate. The deed transferred the building to the trust." "What deed?" "The one filed with the county recorder." Gregory's hand dropped. Dustin took the photocopied loan note from the envelope. Grandpa explained why. Denise saw her signature before Dustin said anything. She pulled out a chair but didn't sit. "Where did you get that?" "It was with his letter. That money was an investment. He called it a loan. We were opening a business. He wanted to help." Gregory's voice sharpened. "The franchise company lied about the territory. The numbers they gave us were useless." "No one said it was your fault," Dustin said. "Your grandfather spent years acting like it was." Denise picked up the copy. Her eyes moved across the payment terms and stopped at Robert's notation. "He told me we didn't have to pay it back." "He wrote that he waived collection," Angel said. "That isn't the same as saying it never happened." Denise lowered the page. For the first time, Dustin saw something beneath her control. Not surprise about the failed business. She and Gregory had lived through that. The surprise was that Robert had connected it to the Bellwether Trust and left the connection in writing. Gregory walked to the window. "We lost everything in that store." "You kept your house," Holly said. "You don't know what we kept." Denise looked at Dustin. "We spent years recovering. Dad had the drive-in sitting there, losing value. He had this building collecting rent, and every time we asked what his plans were, he treated us like we were trying to rob him. You didn't know he owned this. I knew he had money tied up downtown. I thought he rented space and helped Holly. He never told me it was all his." Gregory turned from the window. "The drive-in sale is how we finally put that failure behind us. If you start challenging the estate inventory, Heartland can delay closing. I'm not challenging the drive-in. Your attorney will. That's what attorneys do." Angel's expression stayed calm. "I'm not Dustin's attorney yet. Then stay out of it." Denise placed the loan copy on the table. "We're not taking this because we want to leave you homeless," she said. "We're trying to finish what Dad left us." Dustin looked around the loft Robert had prepared, then at the coat he still wore because he had no other place to keep it. "You already left me homeless." Denise flinched, but Gregory stepped forward. "We can settle this sensibly. The building gets added to the estate. You receive some cash. Nobody holds up the land closing, and nobody drags private family history through court. How much cash? We'd have to discuss it. You came upstairs without knowing what was found, and you already want me to give it up." Gregory opened his mouth, but Denise answered. "Yes," she said. The honesty of it quieted him. She looked at Robert's letter, the trust, and the safe set behind the finished shelves. Her father's decision was no longer something she could explain away as forgetfulness. He had remembered the franchise, the money, Joshua's death, Dustin's future, and the risk of placing everything under one person's control. Denise wanted the building because she believed Robert had kept too much from her after the business failed. Gregory wanted it folded into a clean estate so the drive-in sale could close and the old loss could finally become money again. Neither of them had expected Dustin to find the reason written down. Gregory wanted an answer before they left. How much would it take, he asked. Dustin looked at Angel. She closed the document box. There won't be a settlement discussion tonight. I wasn't asking you. No, Dustin said. You were asking me before I know what the building is worth. Denise picked up her purse. You think this is worth more than your family? I think Grandpa expected that question. She stood very still, then walked out of the loft. Gregory followed her. At the landing, he turned back. The developer won't wait forever. That's between you and the developer, Dustin said. It becomes your problem if this sale falls apart. Scott locked the door after him. Holly went downstairs to check the store. Angel packed the trust, deed, letter, and loan copy into separate document sleeves. Dustin returned the silver dollars to the safe. Where should the originals stay? He asked. Not here now that they know where the safe is. Angel had a fireproof cabinet at her office. She wrote a receipt listing each item she took, signed it, and had Dustin and Scott sign as witnesses. Dustin kept copies of Robert's letter and the trust's beneficiary section. Can Denise remove tenants while this is disputed? Scott asked. Not lawfully without authority. She has keys to the rear door. Holly should change the ground floor lock with the consent of whoever has authority. That's the question, Dustin said. Angel looked at the trust again. The document names you as successor trustee after Robert's death. If it's valid, the authority is yours. How do we prove valid? We match every part that can be independently checked. She began the next morning at the county recorder's office. Dustin went with her. Scott stayed at work to finish the reception desk, and Holly opened her store at 9 as usual. The recorder's office occupied a quiet room in the courthouse. Bound property indexes filled shelves along one wall. A clerk brought out a certified copy of the deed filed in 2013. The copy carried the county stamp and recording number. It transferred the Bellwether building from Robert Peterson personally to Robert Peterson as trustee of the Robert Peterson Bellwether Trust, dated the same day as the document found in the safe. The legal description matched word for word. Angel placed the safe copy beside the certified one. Every page matched, including a corrected letter in the parcel description initialed by Robert and the notary. Could someone have made the one in the safe from this? Dustin asked. They could have obtained a copy from the county, she said. But this recorded deed proves the transfer happened in 2013. It wasn't created after his death. What if he canceled the trust later? That's the next check. They searched the property index through the present year. No later deed transferred the building out of the trust. No mortgage had been filed against it. There was no recorded revocation. A revocation didn't always have to be recorded, Angel explained. But if Robert had taken the property back personally, sold it, or moved it to another trust, there should have been another deed. There wasn't. The notary acknowledgement gave the name of a lawyer who had worked in Junction City. Angel called her former office from the courthouse hallway. The lawyer had retired, but the firm retained its closing files. They emailed a written request and a copy of Robert's authorization clause from the trust. Now we wait, Angel said. Dustin disliked waiting more now that there was something to lose. He spent the afternoon at the workshop. The walnut reception desk had to be delivered by 5, so Scott didn't allow conversation while they fitted the last drawer and wrapped the top in moving blankets. They loaded it into Scott's truck and drove it to a medical office on the west side of town. Dustin helped carry it through 2 sets of glass doors. The office manager ran her hand over the curved edge and smiled. This is exactly what we wanted. Scott only nodded, but on the drive back he allowed himself to look pleased. You do all your work down there? Dustin asked. Most of it. What happens if you lose the lease? I rent somewhere smaller, sell the big machines, and stop taking jobs like that. Scott said it plainly. The answer was worse because he had already worked it out. You're not losing it. You don't know that yet. I know what Grandpa wrote. A letter tells you his wishes. The deed tells you his actions. Get the action proved. At 4:30, Angel called. The retired lawyer's office had found its file. Robert had signed the trust in their conference room. The file contained a copy made that day, a billing entry, and notes showing Robert reviewed the beneficiary provision before signing. The firm agreed to provide a sworn record custodian statement if needed. Angel had also compared Robert's signature with his will, lease agreements, and several other documents nobody disputed. They matched. "Is that enough?" Dustin asked. "It's enough for me to represent you and state that the trust is genuine." He sat on the edge of Scott's workbench. "And the building. The recorded deed placed it in the trust. The trust names you successor trustee and sole beneficiary. Unless Denise produces a valid later document, you have the better claim." Better claim still sounds like maybe. It's the most honest phrase I have until a court confirms it. Dustin looked through the open basement doors. The ticket booth stood in the yard with its faded boards drying in the afternoon sun. "What can I do now?" "You can preserve the property. You can notify the tenants that ownership is disputed and that no lease changes should be accepted without legal review. You can arrange an inspection. You should not sell, borrow against, or make major alterations until we settle title." "Can I sleep in the loft?" Angel paused. "I expected that question. I don't have another motel night after tonight. The trust gives the successor trustee the right to occupy it. We need to make sure it's safe and legally approved as living space. Grandpa had a bed there. Beds don't create occupancy permits. How long? I'll check tomorrow." The following morning, Angel brought Tracy Garza to the building. Tracy was 47 and wore walking shoes with a Navy business suit. She carried a laser measure, a tablet, and a small flashlight. Before entering, she stood across Main Street and studied the limestone front for several minutes. Dustin waited beside her. "Is that good or bad?" he asked. "It's limestone that's been standing longer than anyone arguing over it," she said. "That's usually good." Angel had asked Tracy for a private opinion, not a formal public appraisal yet. They needed to understand the property before Denise's attorney placed a number on it. Holly let them into the mercantile before opening. Tracy measured the sales floor, stockroom, and rear access. She asked Holly about rent, utilities, repairs, and customer traffic. "Are you planning to sell?" Holly asked Dustin. "No." Tracy looked up from her tablet. "He's planning to learn what he owns." The smaller storefront was leased to a clothing repair business. Its owner had left a key with Holly, so they inspected it with permission. The space was narrow but clean, with fitting rooms at the back and sewing tables near the windows. In the basement, Scott showed Tracy the dust collection system, electrical upgrades, and delivery access. He also showed her the lease Robert had signed. "Your rent is below current market," Tracy said. Scott's jaw tightened. "By how much?" "Enough that a buyer would notice." Dustin spoke before Scott could. "The lease stays." Tracy entered that on her tablet. "That affects value. Then it affects value." They continued upstairs. The second floor needed work. Plaster had cracked near 2 windows. An old water stain marked the ceiling in the rear office. The floor remained solid, and the plumbing still functioned in one restroom. Tracy stood in the largest room and turned slowly. "Offices would be the easy use," she said. "An event room, studio, or a small theater could work if the city approves it." Dustin looked at the stacked starlight chairs through the open doorway. He didn't answer. In the loft, Tracy became quieter. She checked the kitchen appliances, measured the windows, and photographed the stove. Angel had confirmed that Robert obtained a residential occupancy approval after renovating the floor. The approval was still valid, subject to a current safety inspection. "So he can live here?" Holly asked. "Once the smoke alarms, furnace, and exits pass," Angel said. Tracy opened the closet but didn't touch the hidden panel. "Was this built for rental?" "Robert never rented it," Holly said. "That helps. It's in unusually good condition." At the round table, Tracy reviewed the rents and recent downtown sales. She adjusted for the vacant second floor, the below-market leases, and the loft. "A formal appraisal may land above or below this," she said. "My working market estimate is roughly $640,000. Dustin thought he had misunderstood. For this building? For the land, structure, leased storefronts, basement income, and finished loft. Scott sat back. Holly looked toward the windows, then down through the floor, as if she could see her store beneath them. Dustin had spent the previous night calculating whether $37 could cover food and gasoline. Now a broker had placed a value of $640,000 on rooms Robert had quietly kept for him. Tracy turned the tablet around. An investor might offer quickly because the storefronts already produce income. A patient buyer could improve the second floor and charge more rent throughout. The current tenants stay, Dustin said. You should know all your options before deciding. I know that one. Scott looked at him but said nothing. Tracy saved her report. Keeping the tenants doesn't make the building worthless. It means you're choosing steady income over the highest immediate return. Dustin touched the brass key in his pocket. Can the income pay for repairs? With proper management, yes. You'll need reserves, insurance, and clear title first. Clear title remained the part Denise could hold up. Angel received the former lawyer's sworn statement that afternoon. She placed it with the certified deed, the original trust, Scott's calendar records, the discovery video, and Holly's written account. Each piece came from a different place. Together, they showed the same thing. The $6 booth had held the key. The key had opened the loft. The loft had held a trust created 13 years before Robert died. The county record matched it. The signing file matched it. The building had never left it. Angel closed the evidence folder. You have the proof, she told Dustin. Now we keep it safe until Denise makes her next move. The next move arrived before closing time. A locksmith's van backed into the alley while Dustin and Scott were replacing the ticket booth's broken hinge. A man carrying a tool case walked toward the mercantile's rear door. Holly met him before he reached it. Can I help you? I'm changing the exterior locks. Not today. He checked the work order. Denise Peterson Valdez authorized it for the estate. This building isn't in the estate. I just do what's on the order. Scott wiped his hands and came across the yard. Dustin called Angel. The locksmith waited beside his van while Angel spoke to him. She explained that ownership was disputed. The recorded title belonged to a trust, and no court had authorized Denise to control the property. He listened, looked at the old lock, then put his tools away. I'm not getting between lawyers, he said. His van had barely left before Gregory called Scott. Scott put the phone on speaker. You embarrassed Denise in front of a local business, Gregory said. She sent someone to change my workshop lock. The exterior doors belong to the building owner. That would be the trust. You don't know what it would be. I know who signed my lease. Gregory's voice became quieter. Leases can be reviewed. Is that a threat? It's a fact. You're taking sides in a family dispute that has nothing to do with you. My shop is downstairs. It has plenty to do with me. Scott ended the call. Holly's phone rang next. Denise asked whether Holly remembered Robert showing signs of confusion during his final months. Holly listened without interrupting. No, she said. Denise spoke again. No. Another pause. I won't say something happened because it would be useful to you. Holly hung up and returned to the register. Her hands shook enough that she entered the wrong price for a jar of honey and had to clear the sale. Dustin stood across the counter. I'm sorry. For what? They're doing this because of me. They're doing it because Robert left a building where they couldn't reach it. Holly put the receipt into the bag. Don't confuse being the target with being the cause. That evening, a courier delivered a thick envelope to the mercantile. Denise had filed a petition in probate court asking that the Bellwether building be declared part of Robert's general estate. She also requested temporary authority to manage it until the dispute was decided. Her attorney attached an affidavit. Denise stated that Robert had never told her about a trust, that he relied heavily on Dustin in his later years, and that documents found after his death required close examination. She did not call the documents fake. She arranged the words so someone else might. The hearing was set for the following Tuesday. Angel read the filing at the round table in the loft. She wants control before the full case is decided, Dustin said. Yes. Then she could change the locks. If the judge grants temporary authority. Sell it? Not without further approval, but she could collect rent and make management decisions. Scott sat near the window. My lease renewal comes up next spring. Holly had brought a folder containing every lease Robert had given her since 1996. She placed it beside Angel's papers. Denise called again, she said. She said if I stayed out of court, she'd make sure my rent remained reasonable. Dustin looked at her. What did you say? I asked what she considered reasonable. She didn't have a number. Scott gave a short laugh with no humor in it. Gregory told me leases can be reviewed. They're promising each of you the same thing from opposite directions, Angel said. Cooperate and maybe nothing changes. Refuse, and nothing is safe. What do they want you to say? Dustin asked Holly. That Robert sometimes forgot things. Did he? He forgot where he left his glasses. He forgot whether he ordered light bulbs. He did not forget that he owned this building. Angel opened Holly's lease folder. Will you testify to that? Holly looked at Dustin, then at her store ledger. Yes. Scott agreed to testify about the cabinet and false drawer. He found photographs from 2016 showing the booth under construction. One showed Robert fitting the counter while Scott held the cabinet frame. The drawer fronts hadn't been installed yet. A date stamp appeared in the corner. Dustin studied Robert's bent head and rolled sleeves. He already had the trust then. 3 years already, Angel said. The picture didn't prove what Robert later placed in the drawer. It proved the cabinet existed a decade before anybody could claim Dustin created the hiding place. On Monday morning, Brian came through the rear gate carrying an envelope. The booth's damaged siding had been removed from one wall. Dustin was cutting replacement boards at a folding table while Scott worked downstairs. Brian stopped beside the stripped frame. It looks worse without the rotten wood. It'll look better when the good wood goes on. I'm supposed to give you this. The envelope contained Gregory's written offer. Denise would withdraw her request for temporary control if Dustin signed the Bellwether property into the estate. After the drive-in closing, the estate would pay him $30,000. He could also keep the ticket booth. Dustin read it twice. They sent you? I offered. Why? Brian looked through the booth's open wall. Because Dad was going to have a courier serve it at Holly's store. I thought that was unnecessary. It's still the same offer. I know. Do you think I should take it? Brian rubbed his palms against his jeans. $30,000 is a lot when you don't have anything. The building is worth around $640,000. His head came up. What? They didn't tell you? No. Did they tell you about the loan? They said Grandpa helped with the store. $150,000. Written as a loan, never repaid. Brian looked toward Main Street. Dad said investors took the loss. Grandpa was the investor. Brian read the offer again. They told me this was about keeping the drive-in closing clean. It is. It's also about getting this building. My mother says Grandpa couldn't have meant to give you all of it. He wrote why he did. In the letter? Yes. What does it say about them? The truth. Brian handed the paper back. You always do that. Do what? Answer like Grandpa. He walked to the gate, then stopped. They asked me to sit behind them tomorrow. Are you going to? I don't know. Dustin folded the offer and placed it in the envelope. Say that again when they ask you. The probate courtroom was smaller than Dustin expected. It had 4 rows of wooden benches, 2 counsel tables, and a raised desk for the judge. The county seal hung on the wall beside the Kansas flag. There was no crowd, but the setting was public. A local reporter sat near the back because the drive-in sale had been discussed at a city meeting. 2 courthouse employees entered with files for later cases. Holly and Scott sat behind Dustin and Angel. Brian took a seat behind his parents. Denise wore the black jacket she had worn to Robert's funeral. Gregory wore a dark suit Dustin had seen only once before, at a wedding. Their attorney arranged binders across the table and spoke to them in whispers. On the bench beside Dustin lay a plain evidence case. Inside were the certified deed, trust, notary file statement, Robert's letter, loan copy, photographs, discovery video, lease records, and Tracy's private valuation. Angel kept it closed. The judge entered and everyone stood. After basic questions, Denise's attorney explained the request. He said an estate executor had a duty to collect every asset. He described the Bellwether building as property Robert controlled until his death and called the trust documents recently surfaced papers of uncertain status. Angel did not interrupt. Denise was called first. She swore to tell the truth and took the witness chair. Her attorney asked whether Robert had discussed his estate with her. Yes, she said, many times. Did he ever tell you he intended to leave a downtown building to Dustin? No. Did he ever tell you he had placed that building in a trust? No. Who managed Robert's daily affairs in his later years? Denise looked at Dustin. Dustin lived with him. He had access to the house, his keys, and his papers. Was Robert's health declining? He was 78. He got tired. He became private. Did he sometimes resist help? Yes. Did that make it difficult to know whether he understood every document connected to his property? Angel rose. Objection. She can't speak to his understanding of a document she says she never saw. The judge sustained it. Denise's attorney changed direction. Why are you asking the court for temporary control? Denise folded her hands. Because I'm executor. My father left the remainder of his estate to me. This building was not listed separately in the will. Until these hidden papers are fully proved, I believe it belongs with the estate. Do you believe Dustin should control it now? No. Why? He's 19. He has no experience managing commercial property. He found documents inside a room nobody else knew about, after taking possession of property from my father's estate. I don't believe that should outweigh the will. The attorney asked whether she would protect the tenants. Yes. Would you sell the building without authority? No. Would temporary control help you complete the estate administration and the pending drive-in transaction? Yes. Her answers became steadier. By the time she left the chair, she had committed to the full position. The trust should not control. Dustin's access made the discovery suspect. Robert's silence meant the building should pass to her. Gregory was called next. He described the Heartland Crossroads contract and its deadlines. He said uncertainty surrounding omitted assets could cause the developer to reconsider. He admitted the Bellwether building wasn't part of the drive-in parcel, but claimed Dustin's challenge created doubt about Robert's overall estate plan. Is it your position that the safest course is to place the building under the executor? Denise's attorney asked. Yes. Even if Dustin objects? Yes. Even if the tenants object? Gregory glanced toward Holly and Scott. Yes. Family property can't be managed according to whoever makes the most noise. His attorney returned to the table. The judge looked toward Angel. You may respond. Dustin kept his eyes on the closed evidence case while Angel stood. She opened the case. Angel first handed the clerk the certified county deed. The judge compared its recording number with the copy found in the safe. This transfer was filed in 2013, the judge asked. Yes, Angel said. 13 years before Robert Peterson's death. She presented the original trust, the former law firm's file, and the sworn statement confirming Robert had reviewed and signed the document. Each date matched. So did the notary seal, parcel description, and beneficiary provision. Nothing recently surfaced about the legal transfer, Angel said. Only the location of the original document was recently discovered. Denise's attorney stood. The circumstances of that discovery remain questionable. Then let's address them. Scott took the witness chair. Angel showed him the photograph from 2016. What are you building here? The cabinet inside the Starlight ticket booth. Who is beside you? Robert. Did Dustin direct this work? No. Did he ask you to build a hidden drawer? No. Did you know Robert later installed one? Not until Dustin found it. Scott explained how the stuck drawer released and how the false bottom lifted. The discovery video showed his surprise as clearly as Dustin's. Holly testified next. She brought Robert's leases and rent records. She described his visits, his management of repairs, and the way he spoke about the building. Did Robert ever tell you he had set something aside for Dustin? Angel asked. Yes. When was the last time? In March. Did he appear confused? No. He complained that I'd raised the price of coffee by 50 cents. A few people smiled. Denise didn't. Did he indicate where this gift might be? He always looked toward the upstairs door. Angel placed Robert's letter before the judge. This explains intent, but ownership does not depend on the letter. It depends on the trust and recorded deed. She read only the necessary sections. Robert had loaned Denise and Gregory $150,000 for the hardware franchise. The business failed in 2009. The loan went unpaid. Robert waived collection but created the Bellwether Trust, so Dustin's inheritance couldn't be borrowed, traded, or absorbed into another loss. Denise stared at the table while the words entered the public record. Gregory's attorney objected to the loan note. The judge examined it. This court is not enforcing the debt. It is relevant only because the petitioner questioned why Robert created the trust. Angel read the final legal provision. Upon Robert's death, Dustin became successor trustee and sole beneficiary. The executor of the general estate has no authority over the Bellwether property. Denise's attorney had no later deed, revocation, or replacement trust to offer. He argued that Robert's silence showed uncertainty. The judge looked at him. Silence does not undo a recorded conveyance. The ruling took less than 5 minutes. The trust was valid. The Bellwether building had not entered probate when Robert died. Denise's request for temporary control was denied. Dustin's ownership was confirmed through the trust, subject only to ordinary recording of his successor authority. The house, accounts, and Starlight property remained with Denise. The court took none of that away from her. It simply refused to give her the building Robert had placed elsewhere. Outside the courtroom, the reporter approached Dustin. "Can I ask how a 19-year-old who had nowhere to live uncovered a downtown building?" Dustin looked at the brass key in his hand. "You can write it plainly," he said. Homeless at 19, he took a condemned $6 ticket booth. Its false drawer held a Loft key. Denise passed without speaking. Gregory followed her toward the stairs. Brian stayed. His parents reached the lower landing before Denise noticed. She called his name, but he shook his head. "I'll meet you outside." When they were gone, he faced Dustin. "I knew they wanted me watching you," he said. "I told myself it was keeping things calm. It didn't." "I know. You repeated things to them." "Yes. And you let them put me out." Brian's eyes dropped. "Yes." Dustin waited. An apology that avoided the facts wouldn't help either of them. Brian looked up again. "I'm sorry. Not because they lost. I'm sorry because I saw what was happening and chose the easier chair." Dustin folded the key into his palm. "I hear you," he said. "It isn't fixed. I know." That was where they left it that day. The drive-in sale closed 3 weeks later. Heartland Crossroads bought the land from Denise, and no bellwether question delayed it. Denise and Gregory received what Robert's will gave them. They did not return to the building. Dustin's first signed act as trustee renewed Holly's lease at the same rate, with modest increases tied to actual building costs. Scott received a 5-year workshop lease. Both read every page at the round table in the loft. Tracy returned with repair estimates and a plan for the income. The storefront rents covered insurance, taxes, basic maintenance, and a reserve fund. Dustin rejected 2 purchase inquiries without opening negotiations. He didn't need to sell the place to understand its value. The second floor took longer. One Saturday, Dustin and Scott pulled the sheet from the old popcorn machine. Holly cleaned its metal doors with vinegar, while Brian carried folding chairs from the storage room. Brian had started coming by once a week. Dustin gave him work, not forgiveness on demand. They learned how to speak again, while scraping plaster and hauling broken trim down the stairs. The largest second-floor room became a small community screening room. They repaired the ceiling, added safe wiring, widened the exit, and painted the walls a deep blue. Tracy helped them find used theater seats from a closed lecture hall. Holly organized the first schedule with local history films, old features, and free Sunday screenings. The ticket booth became the entrance kiosk. Scott replaced its rotten lower boards while preserving the original counter. Dustin repaired the roof and painted the siding the same warm red Robert had used. They kept the false drawer. Inside it, beneath a clear cover, Dustin placed a copy of the torn note. On opening evening, people entered through the restored booth on the second-floor landing. Dustin handed each person an orange ticket. Holly sold popcorn from the machine Robert had stored. Scott stood near the back wall, checking every cabinet door people touched. Above the screening room entrance, a simple wooden sign read, "Robert Peterson Room." Brian arrived late and waited until the line thinned. "You charging $6?" he asked. "Tonight's free." Grandpa would complain about the business model. He'd stay for both movies. Brian smiled. He would. Dustin handed him a ticket. If stories about young people rebuilding a life after family betrayal matter to you, subscribe and return for the next inheritance story. After the last showing, Dustin swept popcorn from beneath the seats and shut off the projector. Holly locked the mercantile below. Scott's machines had gone quiet in the basement. Brian carried out the final trash bag, called "good night," and left, without asking for more than Dustin could give. Dustin climbed to the 3rd floor with Robert's brown coat over one arm. The loft had passed its safety inspection. Clean sheets covered the bed. Dustin's clothes hung in the finished closet, and Robert's photograph stood beside one of Kristen and Joshua. The coffee can of silver dollars remained in the safe. He hadn't spent one. He closed the loft door, then opened it once more from the landing, simply because he could. The brass key turned smoothly beneath his hand. Warm light crossed the wooden floor, the refrigerator hummed, and below him, the restored ticket booth waited to open again. Dustin stepped inside and turned the key in the loft door that was now his home.